there is this perception that everything around payment has to be expensive. I need exotic operating technology platforms, whatever, a little bit what we started with. These have to be super secure so that nothing happens, no bad actors can hack the damn system, etc. Whereas actually, it's not that complicated.
This is Liquidity Talks, a live stream and podcast series designed to share the latest trends and updates from the world of Treasury, liquidity and risk. Join us as we power up the liquidity conversation.
Hello and welcome to our latest installment of Liquidity Talks live stream and podcast. My name is Neville Roberts. I'm the CEO and founder of Planix, the market-leading fintech focused on treasury, liquidity and risk. Now, our topic today is entitled Evolving the Treasury Tech Mindset, Leaving Legacy Systems Behind. Welcome to our audience today. Good morning, afternoon and evening, wherever you may be. We have yet another record attendance today, so thanks for everyone attending. I can tell you it's in the multiple hundreds, so a lot of people on today, which is great news. We've got about 30 minutes to run today. Anyone in the audience can ask a question as we run through. If you want to ask a question, put it in the comments section on the right-hand side of your frame. We can take these as we go, or we can answer any at the end or after as well. And if you would like to ask a question, please let us know who you are and ideally your role. And a big thanks to some people who came forward last time. We asked if anyone wants to be part of a podcast to let us know. We've had a few entries for that, so thank you very much. Now, I'm joined today by our guest speaker, Peter Woeste Christensen, who's a director at LPA in Germany. Welcome, Peter. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Neville. I'm very pleased to be able to be here today. Well, long story short, been in the market for more than 30 years. 3 is the number in 30 that stands in front. And I've basically spent the last 30 years all around the round table. So I've started out on the software side, actually a software provider, which is fairly well known. Later on, I spent something like 15 years on the banking side, technology, operations, risk, and treasury. And now the last 10 years, I'm more in the consultancy part. So that sort of rounds it up. I think you took it the other way around, Neville, but it's probably the same.
It's just as interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So what do I do? Basically, all things around treasury, technology, risk, and operations, and actually seeing the interaction of these 4 areas together, and really making sure that that's up to the business, to the business model that the banks or exchanges or what have you, insurance companies has. So,
got it.
So
Perfect
that's
for the podcast today, then.
Yes.
Good. Right. Now, I normally start, as you may know, by asking questions about football and allegiances, but I know you don't have a lot of interest in football. But I did thought, coming from Germany, with the history of German football, winning almost every World Cup when I was growing up, with what happened at the weekend with Bayer Leverkusen and all that stuff, I thought it's going to be a perfect start. But that's not a topic we should probably cover, because that's not your sport, right?
You could say, as a Dane, if the topic comes on football, there was something like 92 in the European Cup where Denmark ended up winning, but otherwise, no, it's not really my thing. However, I think it's actually a little bit of a pity, because usually I could say yes, but Bayern München is winning this year, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't even work this year. It's Bayer Leverkusen.
No, it doesn't. Indeed. Right. So let's get into the podcast. So on the subject of today, and the title of the podcast, I'm not sure if it's a kind of a bold or an obvious statement in the title, but in terms of how we want to start this off, what do you mean by the title and why the need to change now?
I think really, if we're looking at it and the journey that the market has been basically since the early 90s, where at some point we stopped writing checks when we were doing settlements and went electronically. If you look at these systems that we put in the late 80s, early 90s, because let's face it, most of the systems are of that age, they haven't really evolved that much since then. And what has happened? Well, we are seeing that trading and transaction volumes are raising every year. We are seeing technology really becoming far more available than it was when these systems originally were created. I tried to see how I could make it a little bit sort of concrete here in our discussion now. And I just basically picked up, I have a box with stuff lying around. You can't see it. It's a little black thingy here. This is a 1 terabyte micro USB micro card, sort of storage card. So this is 1 terabyte. And I remember a discussion in the second half of the 90s where we did an estimate for a fair size commercial bank in Germany. How big would the database be if sort of Treasury could get access to the full all cash flows known to the bank? And that database would be around 1 terabyte. The IT guy said, never, ever are you going to build it. We built it 2 years later. So I think it illustrates very well that we are from a technology point of view, that's not really the problem anymore. So you don't need to build bespoke systems or use special exotic hardware or anything to sort of do these kind of analysis. It's basic common sense. I would say even the phone in our pockets are actually big enough to accomplish most of these tasks. So in that sense, I think it's actually starting to get to the time where we have to think, are we still doing it the right way? Sort of the way that we used to do it, with special boxes for special purposes, very much driven to sort of get the job done, do the reconciliation so that we know at least at start of next day, roughly processed all payments as expected. All of these questions that today it might actually be time to think again.
Yeah, look, I saw an article yesterday. You talked about the cell phone, Peter, and it was about Voyager 1, and it's finally, the spacecraft, it's finally stopped working. It's been going for about 50 years. It's got 1/200,000th the power of a mobile phone. But there's still a view that it kind of still works. And if it still works, is it okay? But I think from your comments, that was true, but it's not anymore. But moving on, why do you think, in your opinion, it's historically been, or even now, it's been hard to change the mindset to change?
I think first of all, it's never touched our running system. You could say payments is something everybody needs it. It's like water and sort of the infrastructure of the city, but nobody really wants to pay for it. So every business line within a financial institution uses payments, uses the ability to settle. It's just there, like air or hot water, and that means that it's mostly or most of the time underfunded because nobody really has sort of the killer app that they need to put onto the central payment structure. Yes, Apple Pay and mobile pay and all of these nice gizmos for the clients. Yes, we invest money there, but really in the back end, we don't see that really being the topic because there are other things that are sexier. So that we see on this one side, it's underfunded because there are basically too many who has to fund it. Second thing, what we are seeing is we're seeing the market and especially the regulators going on and saying, well, hey, come on, you settlement T+5, settlement T+3, is that still relevant? Can't you do it faster? What are you doing with the liquidity? Why is it taking so long? Are you sure you're not broke? all of these kind of questions. So we have sort of a general push from people who don't know anything about payments, saying that we should be able to do that faster. Because let's face it, most people think payments is something out of a Hollywood movie. You enter in the account number and the progress bar goes up and transfers all of the money. Sort of half the progress bar, half the money has been transferred. You and I know it's not the case, but it's sort of the perception a lot of people has. So
Okay.
I think we are coming to that point right now where we really have to ask ourselves, first of all, our core banking system, legacy banking systems, are probably moving away from the classic host environment, most likely.
Yeah.
Cloud, whatever we talked about cloud yesterday, where I said I didn't believe that much in cloud, not per se, but we are seeing this move off the exotic or the special hardware technology platforms onto something that is a commodity. And in that sense, it starts to get perhaps time to sort of rethink some of the functions within this whole area. And
Yeah.
coming from a background where, well, personally, I'm Danish. I learned what I learned, first of all, in Denmark. You could say, yes, we had Danish krona, but even smaller companies were used to dealing with currencies. Which means that for me personally, I don't see the big difference between a central bank payment or a commercial money payment that I'm doing on the FX side. I basically need a box who can do both. And you could say this mindset of actually saying, let's go in and see if we can't all value transfers that I'm doing, whether it's cash or securities, is actually relevant to track in real time. Because as I said before, the 1 terabyte of cash flow data of this bank, what was really interesting was then starting to try to understand how did the liquidity change from day to day,
Yeah.
from each slice of your balance sheet that you had. And that's actually, you could say, the kind of question that we're coming to now. That we can actually start also looking at what are really the changes to my balance sheet, to my position over time. And especially these changes that I'm not responsible for myself, but basically a client who says, well, I want to transfer funds. And that's sort of the thing where it becomes interesting. And as I say, we are at the point where technology is not anymore the question. We are at the point where a lot of the legacy systems are basically undergoing their final metamorphosis, leaving the server room, so to speak. Perhaps it's a good time to start looking at it now.
Got it. So, look, I think we all know that the landscape it has or it is changing. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why ultimately it's imperative that your systems tech has to support that? So, changes around instant payments, the
Yeah,
impact social media has on payment
yeah,
flows, target two, all of
yeah,
those things. So, there's a
yeah,
big change.
yeah.
Why
So
now to update your tech?
exactly. So if we go back one step and see what is actually happening, I don't see sort of this really driven first order by the regulators. It's a second order effect that we're seeing. But what are we seeing? We are seeing European area. The same goes for the UK. We have the whole thing of instant payments. So we're seeing the central banks are basically telling the community and creating infrastructure so that we can basically do instant payments, especially on the retail side. It's sometimes very, very difficult to explain to ordinary people why a transfer takes a day or 2 days between two
Yes.
banks. And at the same time, we're seeing banking groups making it sort of trying to get people into the ecosystem. And everybody that when I have a group that I travel with, we all have our Revolut account there, and we can split the bill immediately, like in Denmark, which is another story. But these are the kinds of things that we are seeing. So we have the instant payments. payments. The second thing that we are seeing, completely different story, completely different country. The US is now moving to T+1 in security settlement, which is going to be a very, very interesting move. Personally, I don't really see the point. But then if you look at it and say, well, if we look at it from a non-US based investor, it will have a pretty significant impact on the currencies market. So especially London on this case here. So you could say we have in the FX market, we have a standard T+2 settlement cycle.
Yeah.
It's very much enshrined and entombed in the whole CLS settlement setup that was created in the late 90s. I remember that project very well. So there will be certain services that will basically have to be rethought and rebuilt in order to adapt to this US T+1 settlement cycle, and especially if you're coming as a non-US investor and in that market. Again, a place where you have to change your legacy system or start from a blank sheet. We can, yeah.
No, I was just
Question?
saying on the regulatory angle on this, we hear quite often banks say, look, I've got an old tech platform. I know I need to change. I see the value in it, but I only really move when a regulator either tells me I have to, or it's obvious that the data I have isn't enough, so I need to do more. What would be your answer to that? Because it's the right thing to do, but until someone external says you have to do it, I might not move.
I think first of all, it is simply because the nature of the business is changing, and personally, for me, that's the real reason. The regulator is for me the second reason, but there, as long as I understand and can really prove that I understand my business, I've actually done my homework fairly well. If we're looking on the regulatory side, and if we're moving to Europe, to Europe, we are actually seeing the largest overhaul of the whole payment infrastructure since the inception of the euro. So it started very early with Target 2, then sort of 14, 15, we got Target 2 securities, which was a direct response to the whole Lehman situation and basically the Lehman settlement issue that was there. And what we're seeing now is we are basically seeing that process concluded in earlier this year, or actually late last year. They merged the Target 2 and Target 2 securities. So now security settlement in central bank money and the normal central bank payment is actually one system, one line that you have there. And interesting enough, one line against the whole euro system and not just individual banks. And to top it off, we have the last piece coming up in November, which is the ECMS. So that's the European Collateral Management System. And that's in so far interesting. That is, I mentioned beforehand that I come out of a currency area or a currency thing and a currency thinking. And to be very honest, to me, collateral is just like a currency. It is so close to cash, you can't distinguish it. And especially with if I get the ability to basically track both my cash payments over my network and at the same time know all of my security settlement, I actually have the ability to manage my collateral just as if it was cash, and actually creating one view of where is actually all my assets around. And that's really, you could say, is it a regulatory requirement? Nah. But on the other side, the ECB will make damn sure that you have access to their system, because are you a bank if you don't? So that's sort of the thing. Then to me, I'm seeing that every time a sort of a more systematic banking failure comes, where you can
Yes.
say there is some root cause in here that caused it. We see regulatory updates, and I think everybody is pretty aware of that. Silicon Valley Bank and that population of banks that died there, they were definitely, it was definitely a liquidity issue they had. Yes, they had some valuation on the bond side, but it was literally a liquidity run they had, which means that I think, or that would be my advice to the regulator at least, is if you really want to make sure that these things don't happen, make sure that your banks have a prudent infrastructure for actually monitoring these inflows and outflows that they're doing. Even though
And
that they only have a few hours, but it's
no,
necessary.
I agree. I mean, when we look at Northern Rock all those years ago in the UK, that took weeks to unwind. But social media had a big role to play because as soon as there's some trouble, news spreads fast and it just accelerates
Yeah.
everything. But the way that I think I view the regulatory impact on this is in any business at all, whether it's yours, mine, or a financial services company, everything should be driven by business case. But it does feel like an event happens. There's a black swan event. There is a problem with the bank. There's a run. There's some crisis. Regulator reacts. Firms then react to that rather than getting ahead of the curve, changing it in advance, getting all of that value up front, and being ready for those events when they happen.
Yeah, I think the black swan thing is actually a very good topic that you're bringing up. I must say I'm so humble. I have no clue what the next black swan will be. Otherwise, it
I
wouldn't
was
be
going to
one.
ask you.
But it's sort of this thing that, in my opinion and in my experience, it's really down to capabilities. That the best way of managing these kind of risk is your capabilities. So it's not necessarily a function that you need today. But if you are in the market, I still remember during the GFC, we basically held a meeting every morning, deciding, well, which bank do we pay when, and which bank seems to be liquid. Which was necessary at the time there. And again, we had to do that, and actually had a team sitting and going through the data during the night, so that we had sort of some serious data to base our decision on in the next morning. Who are we going to pay first?
No, I know. Look, during that crisis with SVB, in fact, just after it, we at Nova Bank that actually started to pay early. They were in a bit of trouble, and they started to pay early to give the perception that they weren't in trouble. And some of this systems we're finding now in the AI is actually spotting that and just raising it as an interesting insight into why the changing in behaviors is there a problem? So it's not just the traditional flows and paying people when you want. It's those things as well.
Yeah, and I see, and I actually see a very sort of a very core thing coming up here, because I don't know where the next black swan will be. Personally, I think we saw one or foreshadowed one in 22, because we basically had the situation in the energy markets that, in all respect, there were certain CCPs which were basically out of business because the margin calls couldn't be processed anymore, because the liquidity wasn't in the system. And you could say it's always been this discussion that we had with actually moving a lot of the settlement and moving all of the credit risk into these CCPs. We are actually in a situation where we are exchanging credit risk per se in the system with liquidity risk. So eventually it will hit us.
Yeah.
Because the risk remains the same. It will just be showing its ugly face somewhere else. And that's sort of one of the reasons why I'm saying sort of this really managing these tail events is not about sort of daily processes, but capabilities.
Yeah, no, I get it. So look, if we agree that legacy systems on the whole they're not fit for purpose, new tech platforms, it's a big investment for any firm. How do you go about creating the compelling business case? Because it may not be treasury, it may be treasury, risk, operations. It can span multiple areas. So how do you start to think
I
about
think
that? So it's not just driven by the
I,
regulator; it's a real
I know.
case.
I know, and now I'm going to bitch about my own profession, the consultant market. There is this perception that everything around payment has to be expensive. I need exotic operating technology platforms, whatever, a little bit what we started with. These have to be super secure so that nothing happens, no bad actors can hack the damn system, etc. Whereas actually, it's not that complicated. I see it, it's a piece of technology. Information, data goes in, get processed, data goes out again. I would say the average social media platform is way more complex than anything that we can dream of in payments. So really this sort of inherent expectation that things to do with payments are 10 times as expensive as anything else, I don't buy it. So that's the first challenge I would actually allow myself, is to say I think there is a lot of myth around it, given of how things used to be, partially driven by the sort of the typical industry who are typically doing payment systems. So that on the one side, and on the other side, I think it's very, very valuable to sort of deconstruct what you have instead of just taking the whole, because it's not the payments, it's actually the control about the payments, it's the reconciliations, it's all of these processes around it, and actually deconstructing it and see how can we actually create the data as high quality and as early as possible.
Yeah.
Because the data is there. It's just a question on when we process them.
So look, I would agree with that, Peter. And I think on the business case, when firms do that and we're in an RFP or an RFI, there's a lot of focus around control processes around cash, securities, payments, regulations. But actually, the data that ends up at rest after it's been processed, that's as valuable as the processes that you control. You can do so much more things, and the benefits case for that is huge, and it's quite broad as well. If you bring that to the table as well, there's even more reason to change.
Yeah, I think, and that's exactly what we're seeing, is to say, if I have, let's say, if I basically do this backwards and just basically make sure I have a box where I can see my inventory and my balances at any point in time.
Yeah.
If I have this box, a lot of things downstream actually becomes far simpler. So yes, we invent this box, but we can do it. And then you can say, well, Peter, well, yeah, you can always invent new things and CDBCs and whatever. There are so many new technologies around. Actually, and that's actually one of the reasons, Neville, why we are talking, because I don't know whether you see it like this, but as far as I could see it, you've built a company on one assumption, and that is Swift is going to stay.
That's a whole other podcast, Peter.
I know.
In fact, we should do that. We should do that podcast.
Yeah, but it's you could say the interesting part is if you do that analysis and really try to look what it will cost. Usually, if you can identify things that will change, like T+1 US or whatever, or regulators come and I need new capabilities and so on and so forth. But you also have to identify what doesn't change.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very, very fair bet that the way that the whole Swift messaging has transformed. I'm not saying the SWIFT infrastructure. I'm saying literally the message itself hasn't really changed. It looks to be very, very stable now in the new ISO, which has been around for more than 10 years, which is nothing really new. But we are seeing it really, it comes all the time, it comes out on top. So that means I certainly have something where I don't have to worry about. That's given. And even if we start talking smart contracts and distributed ledgers and whatever, you would still talk Swift to these things. Because it's a language that we all know.
Got it. We're just about to hit the half an hour. There was some comments from Leon Unger with the new instant payment regulations in the EU from 2025 on. We get a new momentum. Absolutely true. And tips is a topic too. Look, there's many podcasts that we've had and we are going to have. One last question, Peter. LPA, what's your future holds for you? What's your role in this space into the future?
Well, you could say my role is very clear. I'm actually allowed to look a little bit in the crystal ball and into the future as long as I make my clients happy, which I do. Where I'm seeing what we are doing is we are really into these kind of transformations. And the thing is, we don't necessarily do them just from a technology point of view. We don't just do it from a operational or compliance point of view. We don't just do it from a trading or treasury point of view. We are in that sense very holistic set up. So I have colleagues who are very, very deep into the new platforms for security issuance on the blockchain, all the way down to personally, I'm working with one of my pet projects, the whole securitization area. So on that side, we are very broad, and we are always trying to sort of source the specialists from these different areas to actually make sure that we create a proposal and a solution that will actually fit the problem.
Right.
So we are not just a hammer where everything is a nail. We have a full toolbox.
Just finesse. Okay. Well, look, unfortunately, Peter, we've run out of time. Fascinating topic today. Thank you for joining us and sharing your views. Anyone has any further questions, feel free to ask them as we close or send us some through. We can respond later. That concludes our latest Liquidity Talks live stream and podcast. We'll be putting the podcast on LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Music, and other media outlets and streaming services very soon. Look out for that. Thank you very much for tuning in. Look out for our new next podcast, which will be on in May. I think it's May the 2nd. My name is Neville Roberts. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Liquidity Talks. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments and industry opinion from the world of Treasury, liquidity and risk.